I had the privilege of talking to Joel a week or two ago about the book, which is a great read. If you haven't read it yet, it's a fascinating story and also very inspirational. You're obviously here as fans of her music as well. She sold 27 million albums worldwide, including a first album that's among the greatest selling debuts ever. She's had 4 Grammy nominations, playing with the Pope. Not the Pope who's here now.
My flash won't turn off during the video, it's so dark in here.
It's an honor to be here to introduce her today, and she's going to play for you. And without further babbling on my part,
Well, nice to be seen. Here we go. Well, thank you. Hi, my name is Jewel. How many of you have seen me before? Well, welcome back. Some of you are probably pretty familiar with my story. I appreciate you coming out to this book sign. It's an odd little hybrid where I talk quite a bit. I'm not going to sing that much, but I'm going to try and keep it shorter so that I can get to everybody's books, because so many of you showed up. Thank you so much for coming. So I'm from Alaska. Most of you know that. My family were pioneers. They came from Switzerland and helped settle the state in Alaska. And I was living in Anchorage. My parents were musicians. It was a family tradition to sing. In my family, we didn't have antiques. So passed on generation to generation were songs. They were our heirlooms. And I grew up singing the songs that my grandmother sang and my grandfather sang in the old country. My grandmother was actually an aspiring opera singer, and she gave up those dreams in Europe to come to America to have kids in a free country and escape the Second World War. And she taught all of her children to sing. All my aunts and uncles are incredibly talented. And my dad sort of picked up where she left off. And he made several records and had dreams of going national. My parents made a living by singing in hotels for tourists. They did dinner shows, and I was part of the family act starting at age 5. I'd get on stage and I'd yodel. And my mom left us when I was 8. My parents got divorced, and my dad moved us back to Homer, Alaska, where my dad and I became a duet. I was probably the only 4th grader that went from elementary school right to the bar. But I learned a lot, and I loved watching people. There's actually a song called Rosie and Mick on my album Perfectly Clear about a couple that I used to watch in a bar that would fight all the time. It was fascinating for me as a young child to watch these people live their lives, and the great thing about people being inebriated is they tend to just live their life right in front of you. But it taught me a lot. You know, my dad started being abusive when I was about 8, right after the divorce, and I was already in a lot of pain and confusion by that age. And it was interesting watching people in the bars because they had a lot of pain. There was Vietnam vets, there was people with different types of trauma or just different issues, and they were trying to cover up their pain by drinking and by medicating. And I watched this original pain that they had just get layered and layered and layered with more pain. And I realized at a pretty young age you can't actually outrun your pain. And I decided I didn't ever want to drink or do drugs so that I didn't try and numb myself. The best thing I had going for me singing in bar rooms at such a young age was that I was extremely sensitive. And emotions are your only alarm system that you have. It's your only ability to really understand what your environment is and if you feel safe or not. And if you try and numb your feelings to avoid pain, you actually numb the entire alarm system. And so I tried to make a commitment to being sensitive and to finding my own way of handling pain. And the only way I really found at that age was writing. And so I started writing at a pretty, about that age, 8 or 9. It was in my journal. Already by 5th grade, by 6th grade, I started noticing that I was exaggerating. I was trying to make myself seem better than I was. I was trying to make people like me. I would sort of edit myself depending on who I was in front of to try and figure out if they would like me, if I would fit in. And I was kind of worried that I would lose track of myself and what was real about myself. So I started trying to always tell the truth when I wrote, even the bad stuff. But it was pretty secret. It was just in my own little journals. As my outward world, I tried to reconcile. I learned so much being on the homestead and being in Alaska. Nature taught me so much. It was like having an amazing church and having such an amazing connection to something greater than you. And the beauty was very healing. And I would sit for hours in the outdoors, riding my horses in the mountains for days. Just watching nature and studying it, and it taught me some of the best lessons that I've ever learned, one of which is hardwood grows slowly. It's not a very sexy motto, but it's really been something that's guided me in my life. And it basically means, when I'd watch these trees, the trees that grew really quick, the softwood trees, would grow quickly, but they'd fall over very quickly. And if the wind blew, they'd break and they'd fall right over. And they were very brittle. But the hardwood trees took forever to grow, but they lasted forever. And they bent in the wind and they didn't break. And so I learned that if you bend, you don't break. I learned if you're rigid, you're brittle. And I learned you have to be adaptable and resilient, and you have to be yielding actually to survive. And as I watched nature, everything that survived was yielding. It always took the path of least resistance. Nothing was rigid. And so I tried to adopt those things into my personal mythology of what I did with myself and with my life. And it began to sort of lead me down a path. I moved out when I was pretty young. I was 15. My dad and I didn't get along. The abuse became pretty intolerable, and I'd worked so much of my life that it seemed pretty easy to move out by that age. I figured I could just live in a cabin with a guy that wasn't very nice to me, or I could just live in a cabin. So I did that. It was about $400 a month in rent, and it was really fun. It was pretty scary at the same time. It was my first time obviously really being on my own, buying all my groceries, and I was hitchhiking into town about 20 miles because I didn't have a car, I wasn't old enough. I was working several jobs, and I got this job cleaning buildings, and a dance teacher came from out of state, and he said that if I cleaned his building for free, he would exchange dance lessons for me. So I took these dance lessons in exchange for cleaning his building, and I was a terrible dancer, but he found out I was a decent singer. And he helped me apply for a scholarship at a school where he taught in Michigan. It was a very prestigious fine arts high school. So at 16, I got to go to this amazing high school on the scholarship. I showed up not knowing that I still needed money for books and for food. So I had to get a job there on campus. And it went really good. It was fun. It was amazing to be around these kids that were so talented. They were much more talented than I was, and trying to push myself harder to push my craft further. I was studying classical music, which was very foreign to me. I was a bar singer, but I enjoyed it. I was the only student that didn't know how to read music. Never did learn, which is completely lazy of me, but I have a terrible, I'm so dyslexic, it just was really difficult, but learning by ear was pretty easy, and my teacher tolerated me, so I guess I kind of got away with it. At spring break, I didn't know, however, that you weren't allowed to stay on campus, and so you had to leave, and I didn't have the money to get back to Alaska. So I came up with this genius idea that I would hitchhike through Mexico for spring break, like all parents hope their children do one day. So I learned 4 chords. I learned A minor, C, G, and D in that order. I couldn't go out of order because I didn't know how. And I got off the train. I had enough money to get to Chicago, and it was spring break, and it was, I think it was St. Patrick's Day. They take it very seriously. I don't know if you've ever been there, but they dye the river green, and it's a big deal. I've never seen anything like it in the town I was from. And it was my first time seeing pop culture, seeing America, seeing idol worship. This idea of wanting other people to save us when we don't always do the things to save ourselves. And I began writing this song, making up lyrics about people as they walked by. And I hoboed down to San Diego, and I crossed the border, and I hitchhiked from Tijuana to Cabo. Then I earned enough money rubbing feet on the docks. I did reflexology. It was kind of disgusting, but I got through it. And earned enough money to get to the mainland side of Mexico, and then back to Cabo, and then hitchhiked back up to Tijuana, and then hoboed by train back to school, and without being murdered. So it was like a total success. And after that trip, I had my first song, and I was really hooked on songwriting. It combined my love of writing and my love of reading and my need to express myself. And it was incredibly empowering. That first song, actually, I'll just sing a little piece of it, was this.
People living their lives for you on TV. They say they're better than you, and you agree. She says, hold my calls from behind those cold brick walls. Says, come here, boy, there's nothing for free.
And it was amazing. It was so fun to finally be able to write music and not just sing backup from my dad. I had sung backup in harmony pretty much, my whole life with him, and to suddenly write was such a beautiful and exciting experience. And I ended up graduating from high school there. They gave me a full scholarship to come back my senior year, and for some reason I didn't even think I had enough talent to go to a fine arts college. So all my friends went to Juilliard and that, and I never even applied. And I ended up going to San Diego to take care of my mom, who was sick. So I got a job in a coffee shop. And I got fired. So I went out and sat down at the table, and I was completely bummed because I was paying the rent, and this guy sitting next to me goes, "What's the matter?" I was like, "I got fired." He's like, "You need a job?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Come work for me." I was like, "Awesome." So that worked out really good, and the next day I showed up to work there. It was answering phones in a computer warehouse and selling things, and I was pretty good at talking on the phone. I just wasn't that good at selling things on the phone. So my boss took me aside to have a talk with me, and I thought he was going to reprimand me, but it turns out he was propositioning me. So I turned him down. I just joked it off. I actually didn't think a lot about it, and it wasn't a big dramatic deal. We just sort of brushed it off and moved on with our conversation. I went into work the next day for my paycheck because my rent was due, and my landlord had said if I was late again, he'd kick me out. So I went in there for my paycheck, and my boss was looking down at his papers, and I was like, "Hey, I'm here for my paycheck," and he just didn't look up, and I assumed he was busy, so I waited for a minute, but he never looked up, and so I finally was like, "Hey, here for my paycheck." He just never looked up and acted like I was a ghost, and it became very, very clear he wouldn't acknowledge my existence in the room and that I wouldn't get paid. And so I went out in my car and I bawled hysterically because my mom was going to be kicked out of her house. We both were. I got home and I told her, and she had a kind of odd reaction. She was like, "Well, let's just live in our cars." And I was like, "Okay." Which was a lot less stressful than I thought. I mean, I grew up in a saddle barn with an outhouse and no running water with all men. So living by myself in the nice weather of San Diego for a couple months didn't seem that bad. And I thought I would just get a new job and I would save up for a couple months to get my deposit for a new apartment. My mom ended up going back to Alaska and I stayed down there in San Diego. And it was difficult. It was hard for me to hold a job down because I kept getting sick. I had bad kidneys and I was sick constantly. And kept missing work, so kept getting fired. And I actually almost died in the parking lot of an emergency room because they wouldn't see me because I didn't have insurance. And I was dying with blood poisoning in my car out front. I was throwing up all over myself. And a doctor had seen me get turned away, and he handed me some antibiotics. He came out and tapped on my car window and saved my life. He was an angel in my life, and he saw me for And then the car I was living in got stolen, which sucked. But I wasn't in it. Silver linings, people. And that's how I became homeless. It was very difficult to get out of the poverty cycle. When you don't have an address for, a job application, it makes it really hard. And I honestly didn't have much training to be doing anything. And so I was stealing quite a bit at this time to sustain myself and to feed myself. It started with carrots, which apparently are the gateway vegetable. Pretty soon it led to the hard stuff, imported pistachio. It's a pretty healthy homeless kid. One day, it looked like it was going to escalate, though. There was this dress, and I coveted it, and it was clean and frilly and curly and white, and it represented everything I didn't have and wasn't, and I went in there trying to figure out how I could steal it. And I saw the price tag in my hand, and it was $39.99. And I don't know what it was about that moment that suddenly jarred me, but I suddenly had this electrical bolt hit me, and I thought, when did I lose faith in myself? When did I stop thinking I could earn $40? I had gone from this independent young woman at 15 who worked jobs and traveled, and here I was absolutely paralyzed. It got so bad while I was homeless that I got agoraphobic. I was having massive panic attacks. I couldn't leave my car or the corner that I was on without thinking I'd be stricken with illness, to the point where it was actually really debilitating. And I realized if I kept doing what I was doing, stealing and having these panic attacks and not being able to get off the street corner, my future was gonna be very grim. And so I walked out of that store and I decided not to steal anymore. And I remembered, I was very fortunate. I had a philosophy teacher in 8th and 9th grade, and he got me to reading a lot of the Greek classics and philosophy. And I remembered several of the concepts of, reality is your perception of reality. And I remembered something Buddha said, that happiness doesn't depend on what you think. Happiness doesn't depend on who you are or what you have. It depends on what you think. And I was at a time in my life where I had nothing left. I had no home, I had no money, I had no family, and all I had left was what I thought. And when I looked at what I was thinking, it wasn't good. I learned so much about fear and what fear is and what fear does, and the illusion. Fear is a thief, and it takes the past and it projects it into the future. And so you become very hyper-vigilant, constantly trying to go, what's happening next? What's going to go wrong? What bad thing's going to happen? And the worrying takes you completely out of the present moment. And the present moment is actually the only moment you have to make a change in your life. And when you're constantly in a fear cycle or in a worry, obsessive, anxiety cycle, you can't actually show up here right now. You're completely paralyzed. And so I tried to figure out and learn ways and invent my own ways of working myself out of agoraphobia, working myself out of fear, and a lot of the negative thoughts I was having. And one of the ways I did it was watching my hands, because it was very hard to slow my thoughts down and even get to a point where I could witness my thoughts. But I could see what my hands were doing, and my hands were the servants of my thoughts, and they actually created and actualized what I was thinking. And so I started to control what my hands did. And then I started to learn how to control my thoughts. I learned to consume my thoughts as carefully as I consumed the food in my mouth. And I began watching what I was writing, and it was so negative and so fearful, and I started trying to force myself to be more present and to imagine good things that might happen, to get out of my car and to get out of the street corner. And I began writing about my worst shames, my darkest secrets, and I began to finally say, if I'm this lonely and I'm this isolated, maybe it's my own fault. The only place I'm honest is in a book. It's the only place that I'm actually honest about how scared I am or what's real or what's going on. And so I decided to try and open my mouth, and I decided to try and let it come out my mouth instead. And I got a gig in a coffee shop one night a week because it was something I could hold down, and I thought maybe I could make a living like my dad did, maybe just singing one night a week in clubs. And I began saying out loud all of the things that I had been bottled up. And 2 people were there the first time, and this funny thing happened. They didn't, ridicule me. They actually accepted me, and I felt less alone. I was seen for the first time because I'd let myself be seen. And they felt more seen. They felt like, gosh, I'm not the only person feeling this. Wow, this is refreshing. And they told 2 people, and they told 4 people, and they told 20 people. And after several months, I had standing room only in this coffee shop. And then after a couple more months, there was windows on each side of the building, and people would just stand outside because there was no more room inside. And they would stand in pouring rain and watch me do a 5-hour show just to hear me sing. It was so humbling, so amazing. And then a radio station came, 91X, and they asked me to come in, and I played live. And that little song that I played ended up getting requested so much I ended up in the top 10 countdown between Nirvana and Soundgarden. Which is weird, but I was all for it. And these record labels started coming down, and they started, taking me out to dinner that cost more than I made ever. And they were like, "Where can we drop you off?" And I'd be like, "Oh, here." And I got discovered. It was really amazing, and my life really turned around. I gained so much peace and so much happiness while I was homeless. I realized, we're all raised with an emotional English in our households. I call it emotional English in my book. And it's a language that we're taught emotionally, how we relate to each other, how do we trust one another, how do we handle conflict, what is safety. All of these things get taught to us, but it's very invisible to us, but it is a language that we will grow up and speak, and we will repeat what we were raised, speaking. It's as if you were taught French as a child, and you can say, French hurt my feelings, French hurts, I'm never going to teach my kids French, but unless you actually learn Spanish or English, you're going to speak French. And that's how emotional patterns are, and that's what I started really looking at in my life. Seeing if happiness wasn't a learned skill in my household, could I learn happiness? Was it a teachable skill? Was it a learnable skill? Looking at nature versus nurture. And if I didn't like the nurture that I received, could I re-nurture myself? We had a bunny when I was growing up named Carmel, and it thought it was a chicken because it was raised with chickens since it was a tiny little bunny. And it didn't eat like a bunny, it kind of pecked at its food like a chicken. And it walked really oddly, it kind of had this weird wobble walk, it didn't just hop like a bunny. I'd never seen a bunny, and I thought, God, what if I'm a bunny being raised by chickens? Like, how do I handle my nature, And so I started writing about all of that and developed a career. It was really amazing based on talking about things and being transparent, and I had this amazing relationship with a fan base. And years later, my future husband, future ex-husband, oh my God, I know, right? It's exhausting. We were camping in the mountains of Northern California, and it was September 14th, and we'd been up there, it was 2001, we'd been up there about a week, and we came out of the mountains, and we saw the flag at half-mast, and we thought a cowboy had been hurt. And then we saw the next flag at half-mast at the next ranch. We thought maybe a local fireman had been killed or something. And then we started seeing all these signs on the road, and it was saying, God bless our country, God save us. And we finally got out of the mountains enough to get radio reception. And we realized that America had been attacked by terrorists, and the towers had fallen. And this DJ came on the radio, and he dedicated the song that I had written at such a dark time in my life, about my hands, about not being a victim, about saying my happiness is mine, the shape of my life is up to me, I am the architect of my life. And he dedicated it to America at such a dark time in America's life. It was a very surreal and very humbling moment, and I'd love to sing that for you. This is Hands.
If I could tell the world just one thing, it would be that we're all okay. Not to worry because worry is wasteful and useless in times like these. I won't be made useless. I won't be made idle with despair. Gather myself around my faith, for light does the darkness most degrade. My hands are small, I know, but they're not yours, they are my own. They're not yours, they are my own. We are never broken. Poverty stole your golden shoes, did not steal your laughter. Heartache came to visit me, but I know it was not ever after. We will fight, but not out of spite, just 'cause someone must stand up for what's right. 'Cause where there's a man that has no voice, there shall go singing. My hands are small, I know, but they're not yours, they are my own. Not yours, they are my own. We are never broken. 'Cause in the end, only kindness matters. In the end, only kindness matters. I will get down on my knees and I will pray. I will get down on my knees and I will pray. I will get down on my knees and pray. My hands are small, I know, but they're not yours, they are my own. They're not yours, they are my own. And we are never broken. We are never broken. 'Cause we are God's eyes. God's hands, God's hearts, we are God's eyes, we are God's hands, we are, we are, we are.
It's interesting, I faced so much in my life getting up to Discovered. I had this idea when I was 15, when I moved out, that if I was very vigilant, I could maybe avoid being a statistic. I knew statistically girls that are raised like me in the type of houses I was raised in end up repeating the cycle. You know, my dad never heard that his father loved him until his father was on his deathbed. And it changed my dad's life, it really healed him. My dad repeated the cycle he was raised in. He was raised in an abusive home. And he became a single father and turned to drinking to try and help medicate the pain. And then he turned to the abuse that he was raised with. And he was amazingly able later in life to turn that around, which takes so much to face that and sort of the shame that a person feels when that cycle's indulged in. And then actually learn to change that and turn it around is very extraordinary. And my dad and I enjoy a great relationship now. He not only made an amends, but actually changed his behaviors and earned back a great relationship with me and with my son. And so it's been really rewarding. I wrote him a song on my album called My Father's Daughter because of the sacrifices that he made to take us over and to raise us, and what he gave me and what he taught me. There's another song on the album called The Family Tree, and it says in the bridge that we have to take the fruit that our family gives us, but choose which seeds we want to scatter in the wind, because that's the job of the kid, to do better than our parents did. And I think my dad did that. He did better than his father did, and he made an amends and fixed things when he was able to. And I was able to do it at a younger age and stop that cycle earlier. And I wanted to talk about that in the book because it's very difficult to have a very open, non-shaming debate about what are these emotional patterns, because so many people face them. People ask me, how can you be so honest in your writing? And the truth is, these aren't feelings that I'm inventing that nobody else has. Everybody has some version of my story. Everybody has betrayal and hurt and loss, and some type of hardship. And the details are different from my life to your life, but every single time I do a book signing, I have people say that they relate. And if we're not honest about our lives and we're not living an honest life in front of people, then we don't actually get to see how other people overcome things and actually learn new skills and actually have hope that we can be resilient and heal and move on and have happy lives. And so that was a big reason that I wanted to share the book and share some of what I've been through. The most difficult thing for me to write about was actually the relationship with my mom. It's not something I saw coming, but it ended up in a very difficult betrayal. And I haven't talked to her since 2003, which is a very drastic thing for a child to do. But I really believed that it was the only thing I could do to be able to heal and move on and go upward in my life. And it was as if after that moment when her and I quit working together and she quit talking to me, it was sort of like having my mind shattered by a hammer. I had to go back and relook at everything in my life and figure out what was truth and what was fiction. And how much of my need for my mom's love fooled me and made me in relationship with a fantasy instead of the truth. And I really learned that the truth is better than a fantasy. It hurts not having a mom, but it's much better than what was happening. It's much less hurtful than what was happening. There's a song that I wrote on my album. It's called Mercy. It actually ends the album. And it talks a lot about, I wrote it for myself. It was a moment when I was really brought to my knees in my life. And it really helped me look back over time, especially as I was writing the book, and see that every time I'm hurting, if I give to somebody else, it takes me right out of my pain. And having a gratitude practice is so important. It's something I'd started doing when I was homeless, and something I turned to again over and over. And I loved this idea. I had this sort of visual image one day as I was looking in the mirror. I was brushing my teeth coming out of the bathroom, and I felt so broken, and I looked at myself, and suddenly I saw this light that was covered, but it wasn't hurt. The light was intact. It was just covered by layers of hurt and pain. But it was intact, and I thought, yeah, a soul isn't a teacup. It isn't a chair. It can't be broken. It's intact. And I had a memory of myself as a young girl before I ever was hurt and had any pain, and I remember what she was like. And so that's me at my essence. And I was able to relate to that and find my way back to that and just start to get rid of the things that weren't me. So it wasn't fixing something that was broken. It was more like doing an archaeological dig back to myself, back to my real self, getting rid of the bitterness, getting rid of pain, letting go, learning to forgive. Anger is sort of like burning your own house down to get rid of rats. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But learning to forgive is difficult because we sometimes confuse forgiveness with condoning. And those are two very different things. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give somebody else. It's a gift you give yourself to let yourself be free. And so this song talks a lot about that, as well as something else that is a concept I really love, the idea that you can only be broken if you're closed. And if something's broken, it must have been closed and it needed to break open. And so you can only be broken until you're open. I've learned to equate all interactions in my life into two categories, ones that build love and ones that don't. Every single action can be summed up into one of those two categories. And this song for me is about choosing love. I'm going to answer some questions after this song. Thank you guys for coming.
Simplicity does not come easy when you're dreaming of being someone else, and faith you see is fleeting when you're bleeding. Your inner self fighting shadows, a constant battle, trying to feel safe on your own arm starts killing you, 'cause it's causing you to sink beneath its weight. Call for mercy, won't you please? Call for mercy, get on your knees. You're being broken again and again. You'll keep being broken until you remain open. So feel the pain, give in to it, cry till you crack. That's how the light gets in. Set your weapons on the ground until you're naked and trembling now. When you think you can't stand anymore, get mercy to someone in need. Give mercy. Don't you see? Life will break our hearts again and again. Keep being broken until you remain open. I have broken wide open. Let yourself be broken wide open. I am broken
So, I wanted to ask, you were talking about deciding happiness, learned behavior, and
Yeah.
you could set out to re-nurture yourself. How did you go about doing that? I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah. It's interesting. It was funny, talking about my life. I ended up in the end of the book putting about 20 the right house to find happiness, that we really can find ingenious ways of doing this. And I share some of the ways I did it. For me, with nature versus nurture, it was identifying how I was nurtured. It's an emotional language. I looked at what language was I taught in my household. Was it combative? Was it avoidant? I learned to kind of identify how I was raised, and then I looked at the ways I wished I was raised. And I watched other people, and I basically got mentored by people that didn't know they were mentoring me. But I would study people. I liked how a certain dad would talk to his child at school, and so I'd kind of hang out at their house, or just watch how certain people interact. I've learned that some people were really patient, and I wasn't raised in a patient household, and I would learn and kind of mimic and copy, but I basically identified behaviors or ways that I would like to be, and I looked at people who did that, and I'd either literally interview them and talk to them, or sometimes I would just watch them and observe them.
Now, was that an ongoing process, or was there like a big, revelation for you, or turning point for you, or is it something that you just, continue to do?
It's been layers. I sort of will get a grip on something, and then something will crop up where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is I have something in the book I say, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And so if you have a really strong emotional reaction to something your reaction's stronger than whatever the impetus is, it usually means it's some historical thing. You just have to do with the person in front of you. And that's usually a clue for me of if I'm being hysterical, it's usually historical. I have to look back at, the lexicon and how I was raised and say, what about this is triggering me? But it's an ongoing process for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, were there events, you've been through so much in your life, were there events that were harder than others to write about?
Yeah, there were definitely. I never talked about my mom or my relationship with my mom or the spirituality and what all went on with that. So that was a very difficult thing to talk about. And it was actually kind of difficult writing the book in general because it was my first time at 40 to look back at my life, and it was a little exhausting. I really was sad. I was like, wow, I've been through a lot. I was sort of sad for myself. And on another hand, I was also proud of myself that I found a way through it. So it was a really interesting experience to write the book.
Yeah. You know, speaking of turning 40, you start the book with that poem that you wrote when you were 40.
Yeah.
And, you know, the opening, in the poem you write, I am as new as I have ever been. Could you talk a little bit about what that means for you, that to feel that you're as new as you've ever been?
Yeah. It was hard to get a divorce at 40. To once again look at a moment in my life where I've built a lot of structures and I have to tear them all down and I have to start over. When my son was born and I looked in his eyes, I realized I wasn't completely the woman I wanted him to know. And that my outer world didn't totally match my inner world. And I already had built a whole life, and it was a very difficult thing to take those structures down. Not only with the divorce, but parts of me had become domesticated in every aspect of my life. And I don't mean because of marriage or children, it's just sort of an attitude and a dullness sort of that happens with time as you live within being a professional and getting busy. And there was something I wanted to uncover and get back to a sort of rawness and an essentialness about myself. So it was a daunting thing, and it's pretty hard at 40 to face those types of changes in your life. And I really had to allow myself to grieve the losses that I was going through, and at the same time to be like, but the best isn't behind me. This is actually the first time I'm free. At 40, it's the first time in my life personally that I haven't been dealing with a tragedy and a tremendous setback, and I actually was free, and I actually don't have any controllers around me, nothing keeping me down. I can actually choose what I want to be for this next phase of my life, and to be excited about that.
Yeah, that was very liberating.
Yeah.
Now, you know, did you find that writing the book while you were processing all those feelings, did that help through that time in your life?
Yeah, for me, writing's always been extremely cathartic. I had this sense, you know, it was an emotional care. I was going through a divorce, learning to be a single mom, making sure my son was stabilized. That was my number one job. And then behind that was, you know, writing the book and the record. But it was cathartic and really good for me. But I did think it was kind of funny. Most people, like, just, you know, go relax or go have fun. And here I was, like, picking off every scab I'd ever had and, like, poking my finger in it and writing poems about it. But it's pretty classic me. I just had this sense that the quality of my grief, the quality of my grief would be the quality of my next life. And I deserved to feel all the pain that I was in. It was a difficult thing that I was going through. And to just sit with the pain instead of trying to medicate and avoid it, I thought was really important.
Right. Now you mentioned your son a couple times. What does he think of your music? You know, does he hear mommy sing? You know, what is?
He goes, Mom, it's so beautiful. It just makes me cry.
That's great.
And he doesn't really like me to sing. It's like it hurts his heart. It's kind of funny. He likes Macklemore. Yep. He likes sleigh bells. You know sleigh bells?
Yeah.
He loves sleigh bells.
Wow.
It's bizarre to me.
Is that because you're listening to that?
You know, I mean, I have the record, but I'm not a regular listener. It's a little bit, I don't know, it's not totally my cup of tea, but I have the record, and one day I plugged my phone in to charge it in the car, and it automatically hooked into the speakers, and so it just, at random, selected a song, and it was a sleigh bell song. It's really pretty hard electronic music, and he was like, Mom, I love this.
Yeah.
He goes, who is this? He's 4. And so every time he was like, let's listen to sleigh bells. Oh my God, it's like a Motorhead. Yeah.
That's great. What would you say the best part of writing the book was for you?
It was great on multiple levels. It was fun to learn. I'd never written a long-form book, and learning to do that was just intellectually very stimulating and difficult. It was pretty scary to do. Emotionally, it was just very cathartic, and it was a great process for me to go through. And also just to sort of have people ask me my whole life, how did you go from being abused to moving out to being homeless and turning things around? And I really was conscious about a lot of what I did. Made a lot of mistakes, but if what I went through can help anybody in less time and with less pain, that would be great.
Yeah, it's a very inspirational read.
Thank you.
Now, could you talk just a little bit about the connection between the book and the album, assuming there's a connection?
Yeah, I wanted to put them out at the same time. I knew a couple years ago I was going to try and do that. One is just for sort of the selfish reason. I'm learning how to be a mom and do my job. And I'm trying to learn how to travel less. I didn't actually go to a major label because I didn't want to do 6 months of radio promo. What's really required if you go that route. So I decided to do an indie record. It's a folk record. There's nothing probably to go to radio. It's a very emotional, very raw record with no tempo. It's pretty genreless. I can't see it fitting on any format. I think I managed to fall between every crack that there was, so that's cool. And I wanted to promote them both at the same time, so I only had to leave home for one promo tour. instead of doing 2 separate projects 2 separate times and doing 2 separate promo tours. So I thought it would help me as a mom, you know, save time. They creatively work together. A lot of lyrics are in the book, just because I talk a lot about where I was in my life and lyrics that sort of sum that up, that are on the new record. And I think actually in the book was Mercy. And it was fun in the audiobook to sing the songs and read the poems out loud. It was fun.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I suppose the answer is obvious, but why did you decide to mix poetry in with stories?
Yeah, I hear your mic cutting out. That's why I mixed the poetry into the memoir. I write differently when I write a poem, and sometimes I just sum things up in a very different way. And I like poetry because it really lets you like see the soul. Long form and other styles of writing like gives you other characteristics, but it just doesn't get always right at the soul and the blood of the matter. And I find poetry hits it at a much more primordial level, and so I tend to like to add that in.
Oh, one other thing about the album is you sing with Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
How did that, what made you, how did she come to mind as like, oh, I have to get her on the record? Because that's great.
I've been such a fan of hers my whole life, just on every level. As a songwriter, she's an amazing songwriter. People don't realize that she writes everything, as well as a lot of songs for other people. As a businesswoman, she's incredibly savvy. In the industry, she's known for being incredibly savvy. Retaining her publishing, and Elvis wanted to cut I Think I Will Always Love You, and he wanted some of the publishing, and she's like, you didn't write it, and he's like, then I won't cut it. She's like, fine. And then luckily when Houston redeemed her years later, and it worked out for her. Yeah, she's willing to be patient. I think that's cool. And I love that as a human, her and Loretta Lynn were just unapologetic about who they were. They were just dressing how they wanted, they talked how they wanted, they said things that were pretty shocking. They just were themselves, and I loved that. So I worked up the nerve to ask her, and was shocked that she said yes, and ended up getting to have her on the record.
Yeah, that's great. Now the title of the record, Picking Up the Pieces, it also refers back to your first record, Pieces of You. When you listen to that record, the first record now, and you listen to the new record, how do you see yourself as an artist? How do you see that you've grown as an artist over the course of those records?
It was interesting. It was sort of like time travel. My 40-year-old self got to have a conversation with my 18-year-old self. There were things I had right when I was 18. I didn't have everything right, but I had a certain bravado that got just sort of diminished over time. You don't mean to. You just sort of get professional and you work within a structure. You learn how to be authentic within it. But it gets a bit tame, and I wanted to recapture some of that there were no rules, that I had 6 and 7 minute long songs with no choruses, and that was kind of refreshing. And after a while you learn like, oh, bridges should come at 2:20 in the song, and they should be about 3.5 minutes at the max, and you just learn a bunch of crap that doesn't help, honestly, creativity. And there's also things at 40 that I wish my 18-year-old self knew. Tenacity, patience. I think I'm a better singer. I know how to record myself better than I did then. And so it was fun to combine the two and take some of those really old songs and take the maturity of what I have now and be able to actually finally capture them. I don't think I would have captured them as well when I wrote them, actually. It took me till now to probably produce those songs like Nicotine Love and This Pleasure Is My Pain, and keep all the emotional intensity, produce a 6-minute long song that hopefully doesn't lose people's attention, and add things to it that don't dilute the emotion. So it was complex to figure out how to do that, and it was really rewarding to do on this record, and to just give myself permission to say, you don't have to have any rules, you don't have to fit anywhere, you can just be yourself, and you might sell 2 copies, but it would be worth it.
Well, thank you very much for coming out here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you guys.